Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Go to Bolt Fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, all right, Bolt Fam, new check-in, all right? How we doing? Some time has passed. You know, we've been licking our wounds a little bit. It's been a rough week. My vision's actually starting to become a little bit more clear as to what I want to see going on in the future. I know for some people it may be a little soon, but we're already starting to move in the right direction. A couple of days ago, we got some news that Chargers fans really needed to hear, and that was moving on from offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi. You know, you got to have, step one of a larger journey here, right? And this is certainly an important one, as the Chargers offense really was not that good this year. Some would say predictable. I would say bland and uninspiring. Either way, the Chargers are taking steps into correcting this for 2023. And this has opened up the door to a lot of questions for Chargers fans. What are we going to be doing in 2023? What's the system going to be looking like? Will Justin Herbert have any input, et cetera, et cetera? Well, we're going to be answering a lot of that in today's video. My top 5 offensive coordinator candidates is what we're going to be bringing in today. This will be a fun discussion, man, and this is not something where I'm just like, this is the director's law. I would love to see an open discussion in the comment section below, because honestly, anything could happen. There's a lot of names out there in terms of potential hires for the Chargers for OC, and these are just kind of the top 5 guys I've kind of handpicked to see, maybe this is where I would like the Chargers to move in the direction for the future. So before we do get started, guys, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. If you guys want to use code director to match your first deposit up to $100, that could certainly make this playoff season a little bit more exciting for Chargers fans. Me personally, football's not football without fantasy football, and daily fantasy is a fantastic way to scratch that itch after the regular season of fantasy football has concluded. With that, before we do get started, hit us up with a like and sub. If you do enjoy this Chargers content, small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into it. Lights, camera, action. My top 5 offensive coordinator candidates for the Chargers in 2023. I got a lot I want to jump into, but before we even get into the candidates, a quick update, all right? The Chargers are already on the move, right? They're already gunning for offensive coordinators, trying to seek permission from the Vikings to go interview Wes Phillips, formerly of the Los Angeles Rams. And the reason I have him in his Rams uniform and not the Vikings is because, well, there's a connection there, right? There's an obvious, I would say criteria that the Chargers are going to be looking for. Familiarity with Brandon Staley is certainly going to help, but a lot of it comes down to a specific system that we're going to discuss here in just a minute. But the Chargers already on the move. They're already out there trying to seek permission from teams to grab guys and get them in the building for an interview. This would have been a fantastic match, by the way. And of course, it's not going to work out. The Vikings denied the Chargers permission in this interview, but this is a step in the right direction, because I would have been extremely excited to have a guy like Wes Phillips in the building. So what's the name of the game for the Chargers? Well, the name of the game in hiring a new offensive coordinator is going to be building a system and a scheme that is 1,000% dedicated to our guy, Justin Herbert. Joe Lombardi's scheme, it seemed to revolve a little bit more around Austin Eckler, which is fine. Nothing's wrong with that. Certainly you have to get something going with your running back, even if it's not as efficient on the ground. But Herbert needs to be the main focus here, right? You've got a once-in-a-lifetime franchise quarterback that's been blowing up the league, breaking every record possible. You've got to find an offensive coordinator that takes that very seriously and puts Justin Herbert in the center of everything. We have to find an offense coordinator that can also resurrect the run. If you've been a Chargers fan these past couple of seasons, it's not looked too good in terms of the Chargers' production on the ground. That's going to be something extremely important as well. Staley's also said several times that the run needs to improve in order to balance out the passing offense as well. And that's going to be something very involved in terms of the guys that we're going to list off today. So in the end, a solid run game will open up the pass a lot more, but there's a lot of criteria going into it. Another big aspect I wanted to talk about was finding a guy that pairs very well with Brandon Staley, because as of right now, Brandon Staley, he's the guy. The Chargers have come out and said, you know, this is the guy for us all along. We still have the same faith in him as we did when we hired him. This is something that we definitely predicted. The Chargers like to stick with these guys for a good amount of time before moving on. And I still do think there's hope for Brandon Staley. So, spoiler alert, I may actually do a whole video on that here in the upcoming days. Either way, finding a guy that pairs well with Staley is actually a pretty big point of emphasis I wanted to throw out there. I'm of the opinion that Staley is starting to brew something on defense, okay? And this actually goes hand in hand with who we decided to take in OC. I won't get into it much today, but his adjustments from heavy zone to man press, there's something there, okay? And we'll get into that in another day. Either way, experience and pedigree is going to be very important here for Brandon Staley, maybe even connections to his former coaching journey. I want someone that's going to help Staley in his development. Staley's a smart dude, right? But he's young, and finding someone that fits his needs in terms of experience and leadership could really help Staley better tune his decision making. One of the biggest things that Brandon Staley certainly has to work on is his stubbornness. And when you grab a guy who's experienced, stubbornness doesn't always mean, you know, not sticking by your guns. Of course, that does apply sometimes, but it also means being able to adjust to your environment. And I think Brandon Staley started to show signs of that in the later half of the season. If we can bring in an experienced, you know, former head coach or an experienced OC, that could go a long way in his development as a head coach going forward. Finally, one big thing that we have to address in this video, because this is going to be something extremely important to the Chargers going forward, this segment called Shanahan Mania. Now, before we dive into the candidates, I wanted to lightly brush up on something the Chargers are looking for, okay? They are looking for a Shanahan-style offensive mind. And this is something the Chargers seem pretty eager to implement this upcoming season. Now, it doesn't mean, you know, straight up copy paste, you know, Kyle Shanahan's system, which is derived from a previous Shanahan system. No, it means that they want to go in that direction. And unlike the Chargers, let's say, short pass heavy scheme this last season, this scheme is heavily dependent on zone runs and play action. And honestly, this is a fantastic system to adapt if you're the Chargers. It's a very easy system for quarterbacks to grasp and can turn elite talent like Justin Herbert into an unstoppable force, but it also utilizes Herbert's mobility just a little bit. Not to mention, it takes a talent like Austin Eckler and immediately makes him a bigger threat on the ground. The Chargers have to sort out this run game, and this is a great way to resurrect a stagnant running game that we've seen the past couple of years. It really puts Austin Eckler's talents and Justin Herbert's talents in the foreground. So it's a good system to try and adapt. I'll say that right off the bat. I think Brandon Staley has the right idea. A Shanahan-style offense that could look really nice with the Chargers. And there's a reason, again, with the running back situation, that the San Francisco 49ers aggressively pursued Christian McCaffrey. He's the perfect fit for that offense. And guess what? The Chargers, they got a Christian McCaffrey at home. His name is Austin Eckler. So I would say think of this scheme as, in layman's terms, a misdirect and an identifier scheme. Okay, it uses a lot of motion to try and identify what the defense is running, as well as throwing misdirecting looks at them to confuse them, right? Pulling all the action to one side while the play develops to the other. It's a very nice system, and it's one that's very hard to stop, and probably a big reason why the Niners are in the postseason to begin with. A lot of this happens, I do have to also add in there, at the line of scrimmage. So our offensive line is going to have their work cut out for them this season. So with that, a light brushing up on the Shanahan system, some of the things that we're looking for in an OC. Let's get into my top 5 guys, starting here with Dan Pitcher, quarterbacks coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, here comes our first installment of the Shanahan tree potential hires. Now, Pitcher, I wouldn't say is a direct descendant, right? Not royalty blood when it comes to the Shanahan system, but the dots can be connected to the McVay tree, okay? And if you guys don't know the McVay, the Rams run a very similar style in terms of the Shanahan-style offense, okay? The Bengals' current head coach, Zach Taylor, he coached with Sean McVay before getting hired as a head coach for the Bengals. So facto, you got some dots to connect here between the Shanahan system and the Dan Pitcher that we're looking here on the photo. Now, this again shows exposure to the Shanahan system, as well as unique and aggressive passing scheme that we're seeing with today's Cincinnati Bengals. If you guys have been watching the Bengals the past few years, wow, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, those wide receivers are ridiculous, but that passing attack has been very effective and very, very dangerous. And as an aspect of Pitcher's coaching style, he's got relentless attention to detail in relationship with his quarterback. And that's a big reason why he's going to be the first name on this list for me. His work with Joe Burrow has been absolutely phenomenal. Now, I know what you're thinking, Chargers fans. Don't let any pettiness get in the way here. Joe Burrow is a fantastic quarterback, and I would say in large part due to Dan Pitcher. I've seen a lot of praise in terms of Pitcher's work ethic and his relationship with Joe Burrow. His work with Joe Burrow has been phenomenal, and it's something to keep in mind when handing the reins of Justin Herbert over to our next offensive coordinator, having heavy emphasis on who your quarterback is and what they need to thrive in the NFL. We could expect a lot of heavy focus on freeing up the passing game with a coach like Pitcher, with a heavy emphasis on maximizing quarterback strength. So this could be a great pairing with Justin Herbert, and one that honestly, it's been mentioned by guys like Daniel Popper. It's been mentioned in other articles I've been sifting through on the internet and looking into Dan Pitcher, because again, there's not a ton of information out there on these guys. I was impressed with what he likes to do with his quarterbacks. Big emphasis on his quarterbacks. And again, what was the name of the game here just a couple of slides ago? Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert needs to be at the center of everything, and Dan Pitcher's a great example of a guy who can certainly do something like that. All right, next up at number 4. This one actually might be a bit controversial for some Chargers fans out there, because we had a front row seat to just how horrible this guy can be in a certain context, in a certain environment. My number 4 spot's going to go to this man, Nathaniel Hackett. All right, everybody, calm down, okay? Let me explain here for just a second. I really questioned whether or not to include this name on my list at all, okay? Because as of right now, Nathaniel Hackett, he should be famous for the epic collapse of the Denver Broncos in 2022. What a mess. And nobody wants to see that with the Chargers. Of course, we're taking that into consideration. But I kept asking myself, when I immediately started to put aside his name, I started asking myself, how much of that was on Hackett? How much was it really as a result of, let's say, a bum Russell Wilson and a poo-poo Denver OC? What really was Hackett doing there? And once I got looking at his track record, his situation in Denver, and the traits offensively that he would be bringing to the table if he were to be considered by the Chargers, honestly, at this point, guys, my hands were tied. I had to consider Hackett as a strong candidate. And I'll explain why here. Before his epic collapse, head coaching experiment with the Denver Broncos, I would argue that the team Hackett was calling plays for was one of the most lethal offenses in the NFL, okay? And that team was the Green Bay Packers between 2019 and 2021. Can you guys remember? Do you guys remember what kind of team this Aaron Rodgers-led offense was? It was disgusting. That team could move the football in more ways than one. Behind a strong running attack featuring Aaron Jones and a lethal passing attack led by Aaron Rodgers, this team was as dangerous as any in the NFL. It was very, very impressive. You guys go back, take a look at the scores between those years. Nathaniel Hackett was the man behind the offense calling the plays there. And Nathaniel Hackett, might I add, has a fantastic understanding of the Shanahan system. And this is something heavily utilized by the Green Bay Packers. I really appreciated that he was able to accomplish, or what he was able to accomplish in terms of trench play as well. The offensive line seemed really finely tuned. And yes, this was heavily influenced by their star center, Corey Linsley. A lot of this, like I mentioned, a lot of this happens in the trenches at the line of scrimmage. Corey Linsley was the guy working heavily closely with Nathaniel Hackett to accomplish this. This resulted in a strong running attack that ultimately opened the door for a famously efficient passing attack with Aaron Rodgers. Everything kind of went hand in hand. Now, some will say Hackett's potential is heavily tied to the talent of a guy like Aaron Rodgers, and I actually really can't argue against that. But when you go from Aaron Rodgers to whatever version of Russell Wilson that we witnessed this last year, I think the result's going to be obvious. There's going to be a heavy decline, and sometimes that decline, it's sharp enough to create a collapse. That's what we saw with Nathaniel Hackett. Some will say the Russell Wilson collapse, by the way, was as a result of poor coaching by Hackett. I would actually argue against that as well. Before getting traded to Denver, Russell Wilson was showing heavy signs of regression in 2021 with the Seattle Seahawks. I just happen to think the Seattle Seahawks are a very smart organization sometimes. They recognized that right away, and they booted him out the door for what? How many first-round picks? A king's ransom in terms of return. Masterful by the Seattle Seahawks. I wouldn't put that much on Nathaniel Hackett. Sure, he could have done a lot more to try and elevate and resurrect some of that talent from Russell Wilson, but I think Russell Wilson was beyond saving by the point he got his hands on him. So I think ultimately all these elements add up together, resulting in disaster for him and his experiment in Denver. And me personally, I do like other candidates more, but I can't ignore his experience in the system that we want to run, as well as his wild success with the Packers. And this is why he's on this list, right? Herbert may not be a prime Aaron Rodgers like Hackett worked with before, but he's still one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and certainly miles ahead of Russell Wilson. So immediately the situation would be a lot better for Nathaniel Hackett to get back on track. I will admit, however, his recent debacle in Denver was enough to keep me from ranking him higher on this list, but I also didn't want to dismiss him completely because there is evidence that he knows the system we're trying to run. He found wild success when having a good quarterback, and honestly, again, I don't want to dismiss him just because the Denver Broncos suck last year, okay? Next up, with Nathaniel Hackett out of the way, I think these next few names may be a little bit more traditional in terms of what Chargers fans are looking for. This next guy on my list at number 3, by the way, is going to be Mike LaFleur. Formerly of the Jets as their offensive coordinator. They moved on from him this season. He was clashing heads with their quarterback, Zach Wilson. It's something that just had to be done. But at the same time, it doesn't mean he wouldn't be a good fit elsewhere, certainly with the Chargers. Now, LaFleur is a move that you would make as the Chargers if you are deadly serious about fixing your run game. Okay, and the Chargers at this point, it's probably one of the highest emphases for them as a team moving into 2023, because in the end, again, like we mentioned, a strong run game catapults what you can do in the passing game. And LaFleur, despite a lackluster season in New York, he's got the chops to transform this team. He, just like Hackett, was in a very tough situation, mainly due to the lack of development of Zach Wilson, but also because of a lot of other things revolving around the New York Jets. Now, the best part about LaFleur is his exposure to the Shanahan system. Again, a lot of these guys, if not all of them, have some sort of connection here. He coached with the Niners from 2017 to 2020 as their passing game coordinator. That is as direct as it gets, folks. As far as some of the most recent candidates with direct connections to the Niners offense, LaFleur might actually be as good as it gets. And again, depending on how serious the Chargers are in adapting that formula, LaFleur actually might end up being their number 1 candidate. Who knows? He's definitely going to get a boost with his experience in the run game too, guys. Again, the Chargers' run game, certainly not great, but again, a Kyle Shanahan, or I should even say a Shanahan-style zone running offense, that is something that is wildly successful throughout the league and something the Chargers desperately need right now. But more importantly, I would even argue, he knows how to work with his quarterback. Now, some of you might laugh at me at that, saying, there were times that he threw Zach Wilson under the bus, blaming Zach Wilson for his lack of success on offense. If I'm being honest with you guys, Zach Wilson has a lot of work to do before leading the Jets anywhere. Okay, as much as I was excited seeing him come into the league, he really has been stubborn in his adaptation to the life of an NFL quarterback. I want to instead more highlight that he was able to accomplish amazing things with Mike White at quarterback. Mike White. We saw flashes in the pan of Mike White a couple years ago. Here he is again with Mike LaFleur lighting up the league. Incredible. There's a lot there. And between his understanding of the scheme of the Shanahan system and a powerful running attack, I think LaFleur provides the exact kind of system the Chargers are looking for. So for your consideration at number 3, Mike LaFleur. Coming in at number 2, this is kind of a dark horse pick for a lot of people, but the more I looked into this next individual, the more I started to really feel excited about the prospect of him coming to coach the Chargers. And again, it's a very unknown name, but we're going to throw it out there anyway. I was first put on the map by Daniel Popper, by the way, on this name before doing some digging of my own. At number 2, my candidate's name is going to be Zach Robinson, Rams quarterbacks coach / passing game coordinator. Now, here's our next installment of the Shanahan tree potential hires. All right. Robinson is a unique prospect as he's got connections to both Staley with the 2020 Rams, as well as heavy exposure to the Shanahan offense. Okay, the Rams, again, keep in mind, the guys that we've been listing out here, the Rams, the Niners, the Packers, these guys all run the Shanahan scheme. Now, what makes Robinson intriguing is his willingness to integrate systems preferred by his quarterback. This is something that really made me turn my head, dudes. Working with McVay, the Rams moved to more of a West Coast concept, empty formations from the gun, to better suit the strengths of Matthew Stafford. This still applied, staples of the Shanahan offense, but more finely tuned them to the talents of their eventual Super Bowl winning quarterback. The Chargers have stated that they want Herbert to have input on the next OC and scheme, and Robinson would be tailor-made for this position because of his philosophies as a coach. He gets that quarterback as involved as possible, and he does what it takes to move the needle in the direction of what the quarterback strengths and weaknesses are presenting for him. And boy, did it make life a bit easier for Matthew Stafford in that Super Bowl run, man. Now, what I love most about Robinson's traits, again, is his willingness and need to adapt, but he's also got a great understanding of the direction that the Chargers want to move in. It also closely follows the preferences and strengths of his players. So all that kind of bundled together, I would be excited to see Robinson step up to the plate for the Bolts. And if our number one candidate on this list falls through, Robinson could maybe jump to my number one preference eventually. So just keep this name in the back of your mind, Bull fam. I love Zach Robinson. I love his philosophies. I love how he puts the quarterback in the center of his operation, is willing to adapt, and has heavy exposure to the system that the Chargers are looking for. Now, at number one, this name probably won't come to a shock, or as a shock to most Chargers fans. This is one that's been thrown around a lot on social media. And I'm just going to kind of explain why, because, of course, my number one candidate is also going to be Frank Reich. Now, Chargers fans should be very familiar with this name, Frank Reich. If you were a fan back in the days, 2013, 2015, he was actually coaching with the Chargers as an offensive coordinator. All right, so let me start by saying a lot has changed since then, okay? And I mean a lot. This hire puts Justin Herbert firmly in the center of, let's be honest, everything. Reich, in my mind, and in the mind of a lot of people, a lot of opinions in the NFL, Coach Frank Reich has transformed into a masterful quarterback guru. This guy just gets it. He exploded onto the scene as a head coach with the Indianapolis Colts with Andrew Luck, right? That was going into a really good situation. But he only had that situation for 1 year. After that, he's been handed, hand-me-down quarterback after hand-me-down quarterback, and still found some pretty good results. He had guys like Jacoby Brissett, Brian Hoyer, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, and Matt Ryan. Now, of course, we're not throwing any shade at Phillip Rivers. He did fantastic, okay? But what's crazy is with all those quarterbacks, he did an excellent job with just about every single one of them, despite those situations. This man is the definition of adjust to the strengths of your QB. In 2020, Reich assembled the perfect conditions to maximize a 39-year-old Phillip Rivers to an 11-5 season. 11-5. Chargers fans all around the world were secretly rooting for the Colts and Phillip Rivers to go out there and do some work in the postseason. Now, they ended up finishing second in the AFC South while also making a playoff berth, be it a very short one. Successful season in my mind. One that more puts in focus what Reich was able to accomplish while specifically catering to Phillip Rivers' strengths. Last year, he carried a Carson Wentz-led offense to a 9-8 season. Now, some of you might say, you know what? 9-8, that's not too impressive. Have you guys seen Carson Wentz as of late? 9-8 is dang impressive. They almost made a postseason with Carson Wentz under center as well. That's an accomplishment in of itself. But just because Reich hasn't won the big game or gone very far in the postseason, I don't want this burying his strengths, because his strengths are what make him a perfect offensive coordinator hire for the Chargers. If anything, those have highlighted them. Because in almost every season with the Colts that he has coached, he's made them, I would say, much better than expected, given what they had to work with on offense. And this was due to his relentless effort to provide a perfect environment for his quarterbacks. If you look at his lone season with Andrew Luck, okay, this is a great example to look forward with. Look at his one season with Andrew Luck. I think Andrew Luck had well over 4,000 yards, close to 40 touchdowns. He was incredible. That team was looking as dangerous as any in the NFL. Of course, they ultimately lost to the Chiefs in the AFC divisional game, but that team was on fire. A lot of them had them as Super Bowl picks. Now you apply what he did with Andrew Luck to Justin Herbert. I feel like Justin Herbert would provide prime Luck upside when paired with Frank Reich. Next is the experience Reich would bring to the table. Look at this man. He's seasoned. He's got the peppered beard. Everything's in place, right? This is a seasoned head coach. This is something that's extremely valuable to developing our current head coach in Brandon Staley. One thing I mentioned at the top of the show, he needs someone with experience to keep him level-headed. One thing Staley desperately needs at his side is someone who can help him adjust on the fly. Stubbornness will get you killed in the NFL. Reich is kind of the Yoda of adjustments. Maybe he can push Staley in the right direction as a leader of this team. While this isn't a true, let's say, Shanahan scheme that I would expect brought in from Frank Reich, it does carry shades of the Shanahan system. It's actually very similar to what the Chargers system was today, but trust me when I say much better. Okay, much more efficient. A West Coast scheme, I would say a West Coast scheme built on similar concepts as Shanahan, but pushing beyond the boundaries set forth by Joe Lombardi. Joe Lombardi was playing extremely vanilla with the worst timing possible. Frank Reich is quite the opposite. So there are things that are familiar to Justin Herbert, familiar to the offensive weapons we already have on the team, but executed far closer to perfection than Joe Lombardi ever could. Now, there's no guarantee. I have to actually close this out with this. There's no guarantee that Frank Reich will even be available for the Chargers to interview. There are talks that he could land another head coaching job with a team like Arizona or Carolina. And of course, if he's going to get offered a head coaching position, he's likely going to take it. But if he decides to pursue an opportunity with the Chargers, and more specifically Justin Herbert, this could be one of the most potential foolproof hirings that the Chargers could make possibly this offseason. Huge. Huge. So Chargers fans, if you see Frank Reich hired by the Chargers as the next OC, celebrate. This is probably your #1 preference. If not, there's 4 other guys on this list that would be super excited for the Chargers to try. So give those guys a shot. But in the end, I would love to hear your guys' opinion in the comment section below. Now, before we close this video out, there's one more extremely underrated and important aspect to this entire thing that I did not want to ignore, okay? The Chargers. If the Chargers want this new Shanahan-style system to work, they're going to need to adapt some speed. They're going to need to add some speed onto this roster, period. Okay? If you guys take a look at the 49ers, you take a look at the Packers, you take a look at the Rams, a lot of these are speed-dependent systems. A lot depends on the player's, ability to quickly dissect zone coverage, reach maximum speed before getting handed the ball behind the line of scrimmage. There's a lot that goes into it that involves speed. The Chargers are very lackluster in that department. So hiring an OC, if they do fall under the Shanahan system, that's only the beginning. If the Chargers end up hiring one of these guys that is going to help transform their offense into a more Shanahan look, the draft is going to become vital to that transition's success. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Guys, in the comment section below, let me know your thoughts on the next OC for the Chargers, who you're hoping the Chargers go out there and get. Again, #1 for me, and I'm sure a lot of Chargers fans out there, is going to be Frank Reich, but there's a ton of other potential falling under the Shanahan tree, maybe even outside of it if they decide to go closer to a different direction. You never know. The only thing I do know is that the Chargers really need a slam dunk with this one, especially with keeping, Brandon Staley, which again, I feel like there's some potential there. We'll explain more of that in a different video, but they need to find somebody that can really carry that offense. Hopefully the Chargers are up to the task. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. Leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below, and hit us up with a like and sub on your way out if you did enjoy this content. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Frank Reich, come save us from the Joe Lombardi mess left behind.